Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my prediction for the upcoming death battle between Sephiroth and Vergil. In this video, I'll be going over the characters' backstories, their powers and capabilities, why these characters were paired against each other, and then finally, who I think is going to win. Quick disclaimer, I have been extremely busy with school and family and the holidays, so this video will not be my best work. I was not able to research or edit as much as I would have preferred. Nonetheless, I am still fairly confident in who I think is going to win this match. For Sephiroth, I covered Final Fantasy VII, and then I skimmed Crisis Core, Advent Children, and Dissidia. I am also fully aware of Sephiroth's feats and abilities from the Kingdom Hearts series, as I am a massive nerd for that franchise. For Vergil, I covered his appearances in all the Devil May Cry games, and I skimmed over some of his feats from the manga. I also covered the DMC reboot game. It may technically be a different Vergil, but I figured it was only fair to include it since he doesn't have nearly as much content to look at as Sephiroth. With all that said, let's get into it. First is Sephiroth, the One-Winged Angel. This story is long and complex, but I'll try to be brief. This is the planet Gaia, which is basically Earth, except that deep within the planet is something called the life stream, which is basically the life force energy of all living things. If this life stream energy is compressed, it becomes a liquid fuel called Mako, and if it's compressed even further, it becomes a solid called materia. Materia are basically little marbles that, if wielded, grant magical powers. Now, 2,000 years before Sephiroth was born, an alien called Genova crash-landed on Gaia. This alien did a lot of harm to the planet, but it eventually died, more or less. Fast forward 2,000 years, and the world government, called the Shinra Electric Power Company, was doing some really dumb and dangerous experimenting. They came up with this grand idea to build super soldiers by exposing some of their soldiers to a combination of Mako energy and Genova's cells. Most people would die if exposed to such a thing, but those that survived were granted incredible superhuman capabilities, and the most powerful of these soldiers was a man called Sephiroth. However, Sephiroth didn't become a super soldier the way the others did. He was actually given the treatment while he was still a fetus inside of his mother. Because the Genova cells bonded with him at such an early stage of development, it had a much more profound impact on him, and as a result, he grew up to be the single most powerful man on the planet. However, Sephiroth wasn't told about any of this experimenting on him, and he didn't even know who his real parents were. The only thing Shinra told him was that his mother was someone called Genova, and that little statement would come back to bite the whole world. You see, eventually Sephiroth discovered who and what he really was, and the revelation made him go insane. As a result, he rampaged through a town before going to a Shinra facility to try and take back Genova's corpse, who he was now obsessing over as if it was really his mother. He was stopped just before doing that, however, when he was stabbed in the back by a young man called Cloud Strife. Gravely injured, Sephiroth grabbed Genova's head before he got thrown into a pit, at which point he technically died. However, at the bottom of that pit was a pool of Mako, which absorbed Sephiroth's spirit into the lifestream. Now, normally when someone is absorbed by the lifestream, they become one with the planet and lose their sense of self. But through sheer willpower, Sephiroth was able to maintain his core identity. Also, while within the lifestream, Sephiroth had a contest of wills with Genova, which Sephiroth won. This allowed him to take complete control of all of Genova's cells, which effectively allowed him to possess anyone with Genova's cells inside them, including all of the other super soldiers. In addition, the lifestream contained the memories and knowledge of anyone who had ever lived, and Sephiroth was able to access that knowledge. This wisdom would grant him supreme magical power, and it set his grand scheme in motion. He had a three-part plan. First, he transported his body to the place where Genova originally crash-landed, and from there he started rebuilding his body into a far more powerful form. The second part of his plan was to acquire something called black materia, which would let him summon a meteor to crash into the planet. Sephiroth wanted this to happen so that the lifestream would then flow out of the planet to heal the damage caused by the meteor, at which point Sephiroth would enact the third part of his plan, in which he would completely fuse with the lifestream in order to become a god. This plan almost worked. He was reborn with a new body, and he summoned the meteor. Unfortunately for Sephiroth, a group of 9 heroes was able to put a stop to his dastardly plans. They destroyed the meteor and they destroyed Sephiroth's body. However, that is not the end of Sephiroth. Since his life force continues to persist inside the lifestream, he is never completely gone, and to this day, he continues to lurk inside the planet, just waiting for the opportunity to come back and terrorize the world all over again. That's Sephiroth's story. Now let's look at what he can do. As a super soldier, Sephiroth is incredibly physically powerful, and has greatly enhanced strength, speed, and durability. After being reborn, he gained a whole bunch of new powers, including shapeshifting and the ability to fly. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's break this down into manageable sections. Sephiroth has, more or less, 3 main forms. There's his base form, which is mostly human in appearance. Then there's the form he took after rebuilding his body, called Bizarro Sephiroth, or Rebirth Sephiroth if you prefer. And lastly, there's Sephiroth's final form, called Safer Sephiroth. We'll start by covering his abilities in his base form. Base form Sephiroth wields a massive blade called the Masamune. This blade is over 7 feet long and would be impossible to wield for anyone else. Despite this, Sephiroth wields the Masamune with incredible skill and dexterity. It is highly durable and can stand up to assaults from other super soldiers wielding magical swords, including those wielded by Genesis, Cloud, and Sora. It can also fire sword beams, which are strong enough to cut through skyscraper-sized structures. Sephiroth also wears 2 pieces of magical armor, a gold armlet and a tough ring. Together, these boost Sephiroth's defensive stats and reduce incoming magical and physical damage by, on average, 34.8%. Also, Sephiroth's sword and armor together have 10 materia slots, which Sephiroth makes full use of. In terms of offense, Sephiroth uses materia to cast powerful fire, ice, earth, and lightning magic. And of course, Sephiroth has the black materia, which he can use to summon meteors of a variety of sizes. Some are only the size of a person, while others are big enough to destroy planets. On the defensive side of things, Sephiroth can cast Cure, which heals a sizable amount of his health, and he can cast Regen, which effectively gives him a magical healing factor. He is also capable of teleportation, and he can create massive illusions to trick his enemies. Also, it's not really explained, but he once levitated the 9 heroes in mid-air, so I guess he also has telekinesis? Now for his second form, Bizarro/Rebirth Sephiroth. Having built this body using alien cells and magical life energy, this form is no longer even remotely human. It is far bigger than base form Sephiroth, a little bit stronger, a fair bit more magically powerful, and it's about 22 times more durable. Also, his bizarre physiology only enhances that durability. You see, this form is split into a bunch of different segments, including the arms, heads, bodies, and cores. Now, the different cores are what need to be destroyed in order to kill this form, but the cores are invincible until all the other segments of Sephiroth's body are destroyed, which can be quite difficult to do since there are a lot of body parts, and even if they are destroyed, Sephiroth can regenerate them. So beating this form can be quite time-consuming. Also, since this is Sephiroth after he gained knowledge of the Ancients, he has a bunch of new magic at his disposal. The notable new spells are as follows. Demi, which uses gravity magic to deal 75% of the target's current health in damage. Slow, which slows an enemy in time. Stigma, which slows enemies in time, deals damage, and poisons them. Stop, which stops an enemy in time. And Heartless Angel, a spell that drops an enemy's health all the way down to 1 point, literally pushing them to the absolute brink of death. Also, there's an important aspect to Sephiroth's transformations that needs to be understood. In order to fight Sephiroth's higher evolutions, you actually have to destroy the weaker ones first, meaning that you have to destroy Bizarro Sephiroth before Final Form Sephiroth will even appear. Speaking of which, let's talk about his third and final form, Safer Sephiroth. This form is even stronger than Bizarro, is nearly 2.5 times faster than base form, and is a whopping 69 times more durable than base form Sephiroth. He also has access to some new spells, and oh boy, some of these are ridiculous. First up is Wall, which creates magical force fields around Sephiroth that reduce all incoming damage. Next is Pale Horse, a magical attack which deals damage and inflicts the Small, Sad, and Frog status effects. That's right, this attack literally turns you into a small, depressed frog. I couldn't make that up. Next is an unnamed physical attack which blinds and paralyzes foes. Then there's Shadow Flare, which summons orbs of dark energy to bombard enemies. The next spell is called D-Spell, which, when cast on an enemy, removes any magical barriers or general stat buffs that they currently have active. Next is Break, an earth elemental attack that has a chance to turn enemies into stone. Next is easily Sephiroth's most famous attack, Supernova. This spell summons a blast of energy from outside the galaxy, which then proceeds to destroy most of the planets in the solar system before striking the sun, which then explodes and damages the party. Now, the exact nature of this attack is widely debated since the planet and the solar system are still there after the attack. Some people think it's an illusion, however we know that isn't the case because in Dissidia, Supernova is described as, and I quote, a blast of such despair that it can send destruction even into other dimensions. So we know it's an actual attack. However, the exact nature of the attack doesn't actually matter. All that matters is what the attack actually does, and what it does is a specific amount of non-fatal damage. This is because Supernova is a gravity spell, and gravity spells in Final Fantasy deal a percentage of the target's current health in damage. Supernova in particular deals damage equal to 93.75% of the target's current health. This makes sense, as it explains how the attack could destroy planets while failing to kill humans. You see, it actually scaled off of the health of the planets. In fact, when the attack hits the sun, it actually shows you a damage number for the amount of the sun's health that just got depleted. However, it can't actually kill anyone since it's based off of current health. So, in short, while quite impressive, Supernova is not fatal and should not be overestimated. Unlike Sephiroth's final spell, Death Sentence. This does exactly what you'd think it would. It magically sentences an enemy to death, and they are given 60 seconds to kill Sephiroth, or else they will die. So that's a pretty handy ability. Now let's talk stats. In his base form, Sephiroth can cut through massive metal structures and monsters just as a side effect of his sword swings. And this guy, a weaker clone of Sephiroth, was strong enough to smash right through a tree with a single punch, which I imagine would have required well over 50 tons of force considering the size of the thing. In terms of speed, I can be a tad more precise. Sephiroth has a habit of appearing to strike once with his sword and actually striking a bunch of times too fast for the eye to see. The best I've seen from him is 13 strikes, which would mean he is capable of swinging his sword 13 times in less than 1/220th of a second. That would mean that Sephiroth is capable of swinging his sword at a rate of 2,860 swings per second, which is pretty fast. In terms of durability, base form Sephiroth has tanked Dragonfire without injury, and he tanked over a dozen Fire Blasts from Genesis, a fellow super soldier. And a single one of his Fire Blasts was powerful enough to blow a 15-foot wide hole in a wall of solid metal. And Sephiroth tanked over a dozen of these blasts without a scratch. Add in the 69 times durability that his final form gives, plus all his barriers and healing, and Sephiroth becomes quite difficult to kill. Speaking of barriers, one feat Sephiroth has was when he made a magical barrier around his evil lair, and this barrier was so durable that it took an energy cannon the size of a city to destroy it. So that's pretty impressive. In terms of skill and experience, Sephiroth's exact age is unknown, but he's somewhere in his late 20s/early 30s, and he has been fighting for most of his life. He also has first-class soldier training, and was a major component in winning a war. And lastly, Sephiroth has a keen intellect and is a master manipulator. All that said, Sephiroth is far from perfect. He has lost one-on-one duels at the hands of both Cloud and Sora, and while he has never lost a one-on-one match while in his later transformations, those forms did ultimately get destroyed in the end. Also, Sephiroth is very arrogant, seeing himself as no less than a god, and arguably his biggest weakness is his insanity. The dude is bonkers, and while that may make him unpredictable, it can also lead to him over-obsessing on certain details to the point that he ignores everything else. After all, it was his obsession with Geneva that led to his death at the start of his story. That's everything I know about Sephiroth. Now for Vergil. This story is not nearly as complicated. 2,000 years ago, there was an epic war being waged between humanity and the forces of Hell. Luckily for humanity, a powerful demon swordsman called Sparta turned to the side of good, and single-handedly defeated Mundus, the ruler of Hell. Sparta then decided to protect humanity by closing the portal to Hell permanently, or so he thought. Fast forward 2,000 years, and Sparta somehow escaped the underworld and fell in love with a woman called Eva. He had 2 children with her, 2 boys to be precise, one of which was named Dante, and the other was named Vergil. Then Sparta mysteriously disappeared, and some demons who hated him decided to hunt down and murder his family. They successfully killed Eva, and it was thought that they killed Vergil as well, but as luck would have it, Vergil's kick-ass demon blood kept him kicking. Vergil would spend the next few decades training and seeking power, so as to ensure that whatever else happened in his life would occur because he willed it, and no one else. To this end, he sought to claim the power of his father, which had been sealed away in the demon world. So Vergil reopened a gate to Hell and traveled there to acquire his father's sword. However, he ended up having to fight his brother over who would get the sword, and Vergil lost that fight, so he decided to stay in Hell. While there, Vergil ended up picking a fight with Mundus, the former ruler of Hell, and Vergil lost that fight as well. Mundus then corrupted Vergil and transformed him into Nello Angelo, or Nero Angelo? Regardless, this form was a lot less precise and versatile than Vergil's original form, but it made up for it in increased power and strength. Nello Angelo was then deployed by Mundus against Dante, and Dante once more defeated him, this time for good. Vergil was dead, or at least that's how it went in the original series. In the reboot series, Vergil actually takes over Hell and becomes its new king, so that's neat. That's enough backstory, despite it really not being that much backstory. Now let's look at what he can do. Thanks to his demonic heritage, Vergil has greatly increased strength, speed, and durability. Like his brother, he also has a pretty wicked healing factor, which lets him recover from most wounds. His main weapon in battle is a katana called Yamato. This blade originally belonged to his father, and it is very powerful. It is so sharp that it can cut through almost anything, even the fabric of space. This allows Vergil to cut people from a distance. So that's pretty neat. Some of Vergil's other weapons include Beowulf, a set of gauntlets and boots that enhance his striking power. He has also wielded another of his father's swords, called Force Edge, which can fire off sword beams. And lastly, Vergil can summon an unlimited number of energy swords, which he can launch at his opponents. But that's not all. Vergil also has access to something called a Devil Trigger, which transforms Vergil into a full-blown demon while simultaneously boosting all of his stats. In the reboot series, Vergil's Devil Trigger could also create a fighting clone of himself. In addition, his Nello Angelo form could fire energy blasts, and it could also turn into fire or something like that. Also, Vergil is capable of short-range teleportation, which is handy for getting the jump on foes or avoiding attacks. That's all of Vergil's abilities. Now let's talk stats. Vergil is quite lacking in terms of strength feats, but he seems to be about on par with his brother, and Dante was capable of blocking attacks from giant demons. In terms of speed, I can be a bit more precise. In one feat, which you're likely familiar with, Dante and Vergil together created a completely open space in a rainstorm, just from swinging their swords. Death Battle calculated this feat, and they found that the brothers would have had to have destroyed 108,000 raindrops in less than a second. Assuming Vergil did his fair share, that would mean he struck 54,000 raindrops. If we conclude that Vergil is striking about 5 raindrops per sword swing, that would mean he is capable of swinging his sword at a pace of 10,800 swings per second. That's pretty freaking fast! In terms of durability, Vergil isn't quite as tough as his brother, but his healing factor was still good enough to keep him alive even after his brother cut him in half. And Vergil's Devil Trigger only enhances that healing. In terms of skill and experience, Vergil is a masterful swordsman, and he's been fighting for most of his life. And while his exact age isn't known, he's likely somewhere in his late 20s or early 30s. During that time, countless demons have fallen in Vergil's wake. And lastly, Vergil is far more level-headed and calculative than his brother, which is a big part of why he is so precise and efficient. All that said, Vergil is far from perfect. He isn't much of a ranged combatant, and while he does have some mid-range options, he's pretty lacking in terms of long range. And while Vergil's healing factor can recover him from grievous wounds, those wounds still have lasting impact. His strength and speed go down as he takes damage. After taking a beating from Dante, Vergil was so weak that he was easily bested by this jester guy, despite him being far weaker than Vergil. And while his sword can purportedly cut through anything, this has been proven false time and time again. It has been blocked by Dante's sword, this chick's bazooka, and this guy with his bare hands. Admittedly, those later two examples happened when Vergil was really tired after having just fought his brother, but that just goes to show that his stamina is directly linked to his cutting ability. As he gets worn down, his ability to cut through things goes down as well. On top of that, there is a limit to how much Vergil can heal. If he is torn apart or vaporized or anything like that, he will die. It's also worth noting that his Devil Trigger is a temporary transformation. He can only maintain it for a short period of time. Plus, Vergil has this weird sense of honor that prevents him from utilizing things like guns, which played a big part in making his arsenal as small as it is. And lastly, as Nello Angelo, his mental stability is very dubious, and he's prone to freaking out. That's everything I know about these characters. Before I get to my prediction, here are the similarities and justifications for this matchup. 1. They are both tall, have silver hair, and wear badass capes. 2. They are both magical swordsmen. 3. They both have superpowered Japanese swords, the ability to transform, and the power of teleportation. 4. They both have enhanced physical abilities and are famous for attacking faster than the eye can track. 5. They are both anti-heroes who became villains. 6. They both have dysfunctional families and they both tend to obsess over one of their parents. 7. They have both nearly brought about the end of the world. 8. Both of them have discarded their humanity. 9. Angel versus demon. And 10. They are rivals to Cloudstrife and Dante, both of whom have had death battles in the past. That's all the justifications. Now for my prediction. I think the winner of this death battle will be Sephiroth. Yeah, as you may have caught on to in this prediction, Sephiroth just has a far more varied arsenal, and while both of them are pretty OP, Sephiroth's magic is disgustingly powerful in the context of a one-on-one duel. Make no mistake, Vergil could certainly kill Sephiroth if given the chance, but Sephiroth's powers and stats make it seem unlikely that Vergil will get that chance. Let's briefly discuss their stats. In terms of strength, they're both pretty lacking in terms of measurable feats, but from what we know, it seems likely that they are somewhat even in this category. In terms of speed, however, Vergil definitely has the edge. Going by their swings per second, Vergil is approximately 3.78 times faster than Sephiroth. However, in terms of durability, Sephiroth once again comes out ahead. He has tanked all sorts of powerful attacks without a scratch, whereas Vergil relies more upon his healing factor to survive. Considering that Sephiroth has his own form of healing, that gives him a clear advantage in this category. Not to mention their transformations. Vergil's Devil Trigger is temporary, whereas Sephiroth's forms are not. Plus, Vergil's Devil Trigger is not all that impressive. Sure, it's a boost, but it's nothing monumental, whereas the difference in durability between base form and final form Sephiroth is gargantuan. That said, as we look at their weapons, Vergil's Yamato is clearly superior to Sephiroth's Masamune. Yamato can cut through dimensions, which is ridiculous, and while I don't think he could cut through Masamune, it is still the superior sword in terms of cutting ability. So, looking at just their base stats, this match seems pretty even. Vergil is faster and has the better sword, but Sephiroth is far bigger and tougher. However, Sephiroth is more than just a swordsman, and that is the crux of this matchup. Despite their similarities, these characters are drastically different in terms of how they fight. Vergil is almost exclusively a swordsman, and his magic is really just there to make him a better melee fighter. By contrast, Sephiroth is a wizard who just so happens to be pretty good with a sword. Sure, if this was purely a sword duel, then Vergil would win on pure speed alone. But Sephiroth does not actually prefer melee combat. In his base form, he splits it pretty evenly between swordplay and magic, but once he ascends to his higher forms, he discards his sword entirely and prefers to instead just bombard his foes from afar with magic. And to be blunt, if Sephiroth is allowed to cast any of his spells, it will win the fight by itself. Don't believe me? Then let's go through it. One option Sephiroth has is to grievously wound Vergil with spells like Demi, Supernova, and Heartless Angel. Sure, none of these would kill Vergil, but as we've already discussed, the more damage Vergil takes, the lower his strength and speed becomes. So if Sephiroth is allowed to cast any of these three spells, Vergil's stats will drop so low that his ability to kill Sephiroth would be ruined. The second option Sephiroth has is just to incapacitate Vergil. He could turn him into a small sad frog, or he could turn him into stone, or he could just stop him in time. Any of these would leave Vergil completely helpless. And the third option at Sephiroth's disposal is just to straight up kill Vergil. Vergil has no way to counter something like Death Sentence, which would kill him in 60 seconds. And then there's the matter of Meteor, which I would like to cover in depth. The exact power of Meteor varies, but I have found a fairly decent method of measuring the power of a meteor Sephiroth could summon within the span of a death battle. You see, there is a direct correlation between the destructive power of Meteor and the time it takes for the meteor to arrive. The small ones appear and impact immediately, the bigger ones take seconds or minutes, and the planet-busting one he made in FF7 took 2 weeks to impact. Now, since there's this correlation between impact power and time it takes to impact, we can make a decent estimation of the power of a meteor Sephiroth can summon within the span of a death battle. We simply divide the destructive potential of the meteor from FF7 by the time it took to arrive in order to create a unit of measurement that will let us calculate the power of any meteor Sephiroth could possibly create. There are 20,160 minutes in a 2-week period, and the energy needed to destroy Gaia, which is pretty much Earth, would be about 53 quadrillion megatons. Divide that by 20,160, and we find that the power of a Sephiroth meteor that takes 1 minute to impact would hit with about 2.6 trillion megatons of TNT. That is over 1.8 billion times the entire world nuclear arsenal. Now, let's say that we're being too generous in assuming that this meteor could destroy the planet. Maybe the characters who were saying that were exaggerating. Fine. Let's instead assume it's only as strong as the asteroid impact that wiped out the dinosaurs, which only hit with about 100 million megatons. That's less than 1/millionth of 1% of the power needed to destroy the planet, so understand that this is an extreme lowball. Running the 100 million megatons through the exact same equation finds that the absolute minimum power of a 1-minute Sephiroth meteor is equal to 4,960 megatons. That's over 3 times the power of the entire world nuclear arsenal. Vergil is a tough guy, but there is no way in hell that he is surviving that. So I think I've made it pretty clear that Sephiroth's magic would win him the fight if he was allowed to cast it. So in order for Vergil to win, he would have to kill Sephiroth before he cast any of his spells, which I just don't think he could do. Sephiroth in his base form has tanked assaults from the likes of Genesis, Cloud, and Sora, all of whom wield impressive magical swords. And that's just base form Sephiroth. His higher evolutions are exponentially more durable. And then there's the matter of Sephiroth's healing magic, which has recovered him from mortal wounds and even regenerated entire body parts, including his head. On top of that are Sephiroth's magical barriers, which, as you may recall, once required a city-sized energy cannon to destroy. And on top of that is the fact that Sephiroth can fly while Vergil cannot. So there's nothing really stopping Sephiroth from flying a mile into the air and then just nuking the place with Meteor. If that wasn't enough, there's also Sephiroth's illusions. Now, to be fair, I'm certain that Vergil is quite capable of escaping any illusion and cutting through any defense that Sephiroth may put up. I do believe Yamato is OP enough to do that. What I do not believe is that Vergil could get through all those defenses and kill Sephiroth before he cast any spells. And since he can't stop Sephiroth from casting spells, I just can't see Vergil winning this match. As such, I am 51% certain that Sephiroth is going to win this death battle. Why only 51%? Well, that's because of what I'm about to discuss in my Devil's Advocate section, in which I discuss how I could see Vergil winning. My biggest concern for Sephiroth is that I am hardcore biased in his favor. He was a part of my childhood, and I will be rooting for him until the sun explodes. And since I'm so biased, there's a decent chance that I underestimated Vergil or overestimated Sephiroth. I don't think I did, but bias can really warp your perception. As for how Vergil could win, the most likely explanation I could see Death Battle giving is that Vergil's rain feat was actually way more impressive than I realized, and that he was actually swinging his sword millions of times per second, or something like that. If he's that fast and can kill Sephiroth before he can even react, then I think he could take the win. And that's pretty much the only way I could see Vergil taking this match. None of his other stats being higher than I thought would actually impact the fight. Sephiroth's magic is just that OP. Like, Vergil could be way more durable than I thought he was, and I still don't think he could survive Sephiroth's attacks. Regardless, that's how I could see Vergil winning. That's it for the Devil's Advocate section, which means we've reached the end of the video. I wish I had been able to do more work on this video, but life really got in the way, unfortunately. But regardless who wins this fight, I'm sure it's gonna be epic, so I hope you guys enjoy it. And I hope you guys have had a good year as well. 2017 was far from perfect, but it was also the year that I really started getting into these predictions, and making these for you guys has been the highlight of my year. So thank you so much for the opportunity to experience this. I will try to get at least one more video out before the next season of Death Battle airs, although we'll just have to wait and see how that goes. Anywho, I hope you guys all have a Merry Christmas, Hanukkah, New Year's, and whatever else you may be celebrating this holiday season. And I very much so look forward to making more content for you in 2018. With all that said, I'm gonna go ahead and sign off. Like if you enjoyed the video, comment if you got something to say, subscribe if you want to see more, and as always, have a fantastic day.